And we're live. Now, apologies right up front. I started this, and of course, the entire morning it's been quiet. It's been a lovely Friday morning here in Southern California. I'm thinking, you know what? I can get the podcast shot and recorded a little bit earlier. And the second I sit in the chair, I get the mic all fired up and ready to go. What happens? But a garbage truck is right outside my window right now with the beeping and the clanging and the flavin. So if that noise makes its way into this podcast, I do apologize. Being the master of microphones that I am, I'm hoping I'm using the right recording instrument to make sure that as little of that noise pollution makes its way in as possible. But gadget gals, gadget guys, it's been a heck of a week. I don't know what it is about short weeks. You know, when we have a holiday, a 3-day holiday weekend here in the United States, it is so much more difficult for me to get back into the swing of producing content and getting my work done. And so knowing this ahead of time, I kind of looked at Labor Day weekend and everything that we had. We had a really busy Labor Day weekend. But everything leading up to it, you know what? I'm not going to put too much pressure on myself. I got one video out talking about the Apple announcements. We're going to be talking a little bit about that stuff in this podcast, but I did a whole separate hour-long video that you can check out if you really want to get the nitty-gritty, the full scoop, everything you need to know about what Apple announced couple days ago for their keynote, especially talking about new iPhones, new iPads, Apple TV, some really cool stuff, some really maybe playing catch up, not so cool stuff. But, you know, it's Apple, so it's always a controversial topic for us fans of technology to talk about what they're announcing and what they're bringing to the table. Last weekend, I mentioned in last week's show, we had the baby shower. We had family in town. We had to gut our whole home to host a party. And we're just, yeah, my wife and I we're social people, but we haven't really hosted in this apartment, in this condo that we're in. So it was a very stressful time for us to have all of these people come over. A bunch of people who'd just never been to our place. I mean, we've been living here for a couple of years, and we had family come over and sort of experience that for the first time. And then, you know, we were playing games, and it was this is sort of a newer thing. It's something that I haven't really been a part of in the past, but this notion of like co-ed baby showers. And so, you know, we had husbands and wives come over. And for us, it was really just because we wanted to celebrate with friends. You know, we're also going to be having this baby very soon. So we didn't want to, we wanted to have like kind of a party so that we could see some of our friends before we become shut-ins, just spending a couple months focused on keeping our baby alive. So we had people over, and as you can see in the background here, we had to use the table that I normally use for my reviews as an additional staging area for food. And what you can't see is just right outside the door. There's the closet. I mean, the closet. The hallway is full of stuff that we had to just dump in the office because, you know, we're actually we keep a clean home, but we both work in fields where we just have stuff scattered all over the place all the time. So to clean up for a party, we basically just took all that stuff and then just dumped it in my office. So I'm still not back up and running for videos. I'm hoping that'll be taken care of in the next couple days. But one of the nice benefits was in gutting everything, I finally got all of the prizes from my birthday celebration shipped. So if you want something from my birthday giveaways back in August, those prizes are out in the mail. I was only 2 weeks later than I thought I would be in getting all those things shipped out. My goal was to have them in the mail by the end of August. So, you know, middle of September, that's close. It was pretty terrible. I can tell you guys this now that all the prizes are out in the mail. One of the things that held me up was I had 2 people win contests that then wouldn't get back in touch with me about their address, their shipping information. And I had one person get back in touch with me and he was like, oh yeah, you can ship it here. And what he sent me was sort of a nonsensical string of descriptions of where he worked. And like, that's not an address. You know, that's you just telling me, like, if I were driving to your office and I lived in the same city, that's how I would get there. So that was sort of stressful in getting that all set up. But, you know, we got it all sorted. Everything's out in the mail. I'm happy that we did the contest. It was a huge thank you to all you people who participated, who have been subscribed to this channel and been keeping up with what we're doing. So before we jump into the show proper, we do have a little housekeeping. First off, I just have to say I've been really excited to see the responses from people that have been consuming this podcast in different places. So I shoot this podcast on YouTube. Obviously, I make it more of a vlog. but I pulled the audio for other services, and it started with iTunes, and I got a couple of reviews on iTunes that were pretty positive. And then we moved it over to Archive. So the hosting for this podcast is actually archive.org, and I'm going to continue to throw shout outs to archive.org, that they're an amazing web institution. Trying to back up all of the important stuff as like a history of the internet. And you can go and you can hit their Wayback Machine and see what websites looked like years ago. They've got tons of films and audio that's all public domain that you can go and check out. A shout out for Night of the Living Dead. They've got one of the best copies of Night of the Living Dead, the movie that inspired the zombie genre as we understand it today. And there's a Blu-ray quality rip of that film on archive.org, which is totally legal and free for you to download. So it's an amazing service, and they're the people that are keeping the audio version of the SGGQA podcast up and running. And we've been starting to get a few hits trickling in from Stitcher. So if you listen to podcasts on Stitcher, you can listen to their Player FM. Player FM is now supporting the SGGQA podcast. So just super exciting for this rambling mess of me talking about your viewer questions and comments is starting to grow and to build a little bit. So I'm just happy to share that with you guys, and I'm excited to share that with you guys. And so hopefully we find more people submitting questions and leaving comments and getting really involved in tech discussion with a bit more nuance, not always just playing into the fanboy stuff, which we're going to be talking a little bit about fanboys because Apple talked about stuff. So that means pro-Apple people and anti-Apple people now must wage war on the interwebs. We got to talk about holidays. Today is Start My Own Business Day, which is super exciting. I kind of took the jump when we moved out to Southern California, where I was working for a talent agency, and then I was doing a lot of casting with a voiceover casting facility, and then I started producing my own content, and now a lot of our revenue comes from that. A lot of our income comes from that. So it's always... I think this is the day and age where people can really better take control of their own destinies and not necessarily always play into the models that our grandparents sort of understand, where you just worked for one company for 40 years and then they gave you a pension, which doesn't really exist for us anymore. And so we've got to find new ways of doing our own thing, and maybe starting your own business. Today is the day that we're going to celebrate that. Today is Libraries Remember Day. I don't know what libraries are remembering, but I think it might be something related to some of the other holidays that we have today. Today is Make Your Bed Day, and I did not celebrate Make Your Bed Day today. If you were to go to my bedroom right now, you would see that my bed is not made. So in your face, Hallmark, who made Make Your Bed Day a holiday, or whoever did that. I don't think it was actually Hallmark. I have never seen a Make Your Bed Day holiday card in a Hallmark store, so it probably wasn't them. Today is National 401k Day, for you to be aware of your retirement options and investing in your 401k. Start early, because if you start early putting away a little bit of money, you'll build a lot of in wealth very much faster thanks to interest. So look at your options, high schoolers, and how you can start planning for your future retirement someday. Today is National Hot Cross Buns Day. I know the song. I used to play that on the clarinet when I was in the 6th grade. I don't know that I've ever consumed a hot cross bun as any type of actual treat. Today is National No News is Good News Day, which is a little ironic considering what today is, especially for us Americans. Today is Stand Up to Cancer Day, Women's Baseball Day, and then we get into some of the more serious ones. I'm not going to make jokes about these. National Day of Service and Remembrance, National Emergency Responders Day, and National Patriot Day, because today is September 11th. This is the 14th anniversary of the attacks that happened on the World Trade Center in New York City. And I think today is always going to be, for us Americans, especially people my age, maybe a little younger, definitely a little older, that we look to the heroes in our society. We can look to the military, we can look to first responders, especially firefighters, police, and make sure that this is a day that we remember what happened to us. But in remembering what happened to us, I think it's always important to look to the future and how we can better support the members of our community who are tasked with providing us safety and security. Be they military, firefighters, police, first responders, paramedics. We need to make sure that those people in our society are well-funded, are well-equipped, well taken care of, and when bad things happen, that they get the care they need after the tragic events have unfolded, that they've done their duty. It's our duty to make sure that they are well provided for. I always feel that this is another day for us Americans to reflect on the fact that we are privileged and that we are lucky to live in a country where those styles of attacks, that style of catastrophe, they don't happen very often on our land. So we need to make sure that, being the country that we are, being the center and the focus of so much world discussion, that we are also a part of the solution for other countries to look to help, to aid in making sure that we can continue a discussion and a dialogue of peace, of prosperity, of opportunity for the rest of the peoples of the world, because we have that privilege. We're not constantly distracted by carnage on our streets every day, and there are people who live under that type of oppression or under that type of fear every single day. That's their daily life, and we don't have those issues here. And it's important for us to reflect on that, to enjoy that. I think, we can enjoy that just by the luck of our birthright that we were born here. But moving forward, we can also add to the discussion and making other people's lives better, and not always just sort of resorting to being the world's police. We're going to stomp on things that we think are bad. We also need to be encouraging other discussions on how we can bring peace and prosperity and justice to other peoples around the world. And today, 9/11 is the perfect day for us to sort of sit back and reflect on that for just a moment, because we've done some really great things. We've done some things maybe as a people we probably shouldn't be super proud of. And again, it's always a more complicated and nuanced issue than just the black and white of for us or against us, or good and bad, or evil and terror and justice and patriotism. The world is a really complicated place, and events like 9/11 can help us sort of explore what it means to be a citizen of the world, not just a citizen of the United States. So that's 9/11. If anyone in your family was affected by 9/11, I had family that lived in New York, and thankfully they weren't directly involved in what happened at the World Trade Center. My dad worked for the military, and he was actually supposed to be at the Pentagon on 9/11, but thankfully he was supposed to fly there later in the day, so he wasn't actually at the Pentagon when the Pentagon got hit. It's always an interesting discussion to sort of share what happened to us on that day and what we were thinking that day, and the people that were affected that day. But moving on, because we're going to talk about tech and stuff here soon. So before we jump in, I do have two other quick things. One, I've got to share, because I was super excited. I spent a day down in Santa Monica at the Santa Monica Aquarium, which I did not even know existed. There's this small aquarium that is funded and staffed by Heal the Bay. It's a group of volunteers that are trying to start up more conversation about water conservation and pollution and education opportunities for kids. So there's this super cute little aquarium under the pier. And I got to spend the day checking out all of their new stuff. They've got an underwater drone. I'm actually going to kick over into screen share. So I did a little video. I don't think this is going to play very well, but I'm at least going to try and share some of it. And I'm going to be doing a proper video on what I got to do down at the Heal the Bay Santa Monica Aquarium. But super cool stuff. And they also were kind enough to introduce me to their new underwater drone. And so this is going to be a new underwater robotics platform for kids to interact with content. They're going to be throwing this out into under the pier so that people can see what really lives under the water, even just meters away from the shore where people are going surfing and doing cool stuff. And then this is what they're going to be introducing kids to, so that they can start teaching children not only about conservation efforts, but also the technology that is going to be a part of the future of making sure that we can keep our water clean and our wildlife healthy. I just thought that was super, super cool. So I was really excited to take part in that. And that was a partnership with Jacqueline Friedlander. And I'll leave a link to her channel under the video description here, so you can check out her channel. She has amazing educational videos for kids about ocean critters and ocean conservation and ocean wildlife. And so if you're interested in that kind of stuff at all in the slightest, even just the science education part of it, I would highly recommend checking out her channel. And then she also wrote a book and produces these series under the name Friends with Fins. and it's just wonderful content. She's super engaging. She's super fun to hang out with. And so she got to introduce me to all of these people and to all of this stuff. And at one point, I even got to like pet sharks. So there are horn sharks there, and I'm getting to pet sharks. This is amazing. I had a blast. And so the full video, my full video on that will be out next week, and I'm really excited to be sharing that with you. And then to flip that, I saw this recently, and I almost shot an entire separate video on it. I got to drink some water here, as this is going to be one of the face palms of the year for me. And we got to talk about this. This is sort of kitchen technology. And let me get back into screen share here. I'm super not excited about this product. And this is Campbell's Soup is partnering with Keurig. I don't know if you guys have seen this. I hope you have seen this already. But this is Campbell's Soup, and they're making little K-Cup soup packages. And I'm already not a huge fan of the Keurig. So I don't like the idea of these single-use plastic K-Cups, which we can't make them in a way that they biodegrade easily. So we're basically just dumping tons of plastic into the environment with each individual K-Cup that we use. And that the coffee from K-Cups really is just micro-ground, freeze-dried instant coffee. So there's nothing really fancy about K-Cup coffee. And it's all under the banner of this. It's just so convenient. You can just brew the 1 cup of coffee because it's so easy. And for that, you're paying, what, 5 times more for each individual cup of coffee, and you're dumping non-biodegradable plastic by the millions into our environment. So every time I hear news that Keurig is not doing well, or the stock's taking a dip, or sales are super low, it makes me super happy. And also Keurig 2.0, where they tried to introduce DRM. So you could only use, they had software so that it would prevent you from using third-party K-Cups. You could only use the K-Cups that they made because of a microchip. So you're like, now, not only do we have non-biodegradable plastic, but we also have microchips on our coffee K-Cups, which is ridiculous. So if you want instant coffee, you can go get like Folgers instant coffee or Starbucks instant coffee. At Trader Joe's, they make an instant coffee where it's got creamer, non-dairy creamer mixed into it. So you get kind of more of like a latte taste. There are all types of crappy instant coffee that you can drink that won't dump this amount of waste into our environment. And it's just as easy to do as the K-Cup Keurig. And I hate that argument. It's just so convenient. Let's wreck the environment and waste lots of money. So anyway, Campbell's is jumping on board here, and I don't know that I could be more disappointed with Campbell's if I tried, because they're trying to make this sound like making instant soup is so difficult that now we need a Keurig, a packet of noodles, and a K-Cup full of broth. So it's basically just like freeze-dried bouillon in a K-Cup, and then you dump these plastic noodles into a bowl, or into a cup, I guess, because it's only 8 ounces of water that's gonna get dumped through this system. Oh, 3 easy steps. Oh my gosh, this how convenient. You tear open a package into a coffee mug, and then you walk over to your Keurig and you pop in an individual single serving plastic non-biodegradable cup of freeze-dried broth, and then you dump hot water through it. Wow, that's so much easier than, I don't know. Have you guys ever seen like cup of noodles or, ramen packages? They're all kinds of just easy ways. And some of them even come in their own plastic bowls. And I think that's kind of terrible for the environment. But still, we haven't had problems with soup, have we? Is this really a problem that needed solving? And so I totally get the sort of corporate synergy. Campbell's is still the top when it comes to the canned soup market, but their stock tends to take hits because while they occupy 60%, they can't seem to grow to like 70%. So that means they're a failure. And that's another problem we have with the way that we value companies. Here's a company that was wildly successful and making tons of money. They occupy the single biggest niche of soup in the market. And because they can't show outrageous growth that is completely not possible, then their stock isn't doing so well. So they're trying to do something kind of funky and fun and fresh. So they're partnering with Keurig, but that's terrible. I mean, this is maybe one of the most awful food products I think I've ever seen for a number of reasons. So there's the Keurig soup thing. and with Campbell's. And I hope that you never use it or buy it. And if you use a Keurig, I hope that you'll investigate some of the other ways that you can also make yourself an individual cup of coffee that doesn't require you to harm our environment. And it's going to be cheaper for you to not keep investing in K-Cups. So you can still use your Keurig. I'm not telling you to stop using that for that perfect shot of hot water that filters through. That's actually kind of cool. But, you know, maybe instead you go and pick up some Starbucks instant coffee things and you just pour the water straight through, and then you have less waste going into our environment. So, moving on to some proper tech. This week's talking points have been all about Apple. So Apple had their keynote and they announced new iPads, new iPhones, new Apple TV, and and updates for the Apple Watch. And I like I said, I did a whole video. I'll leave a link below this video so that you can go directly to that video. But they're always such a lightning rod for discussion. And so just briefly running down, the Apple Watch is going to be getting new software where there's going to be a bigger focus on biometric data, working with healthcare. And I think that's actually very exciting. So we're already wearing technology a lot. So why not start incorporating better notifications and better information and data gathering that you can send directly to your doctor? You know, and so they gave an example of a pregnancy where you could very easily check the mother's heart rate and then using other sensors check the baby's heart rate. And because now you have better data and better information, you can split that data easier for doctors to see what's going on with the pregnant woman. I think that's kind of cool, especially since, you know, my wife has a bun in the oven. So there was also the new iPhone. So the iPhone 6S and 6S Plus. So we're going to have the exact same screen sizes, 4.7 inch and 5.5 inch. And a lot of the outside stuff looks the same because, you know, Apple with the S series, they don't change the form factor. They just change the technology that goes into it. They're getting more powerful. There's going to be a higher resolution camera. This is one of the things that bugs me about Apple. They kept saying the bigger camera. And like, it's not a bigger camera, it's a higher resolution camera. So there are more megapixels, but it seems like Apple's going to use the same size image sensor. So things like macro photography, depth of field blur, the bokeh, all of that's going to kind of stay the same. What will change is your ability to get higher resolution information out of that camera. So you'll have better information for cropping. You can zoom in better when you zoom on your camera. And it finally brings 4K video recording, which again, whenever Apple does something, now we have people saying it's cool. Whereas when we were doing this 2 years ago on LGs and Samsungs, everyone was, oh, why would you ever need to use that much resolution in your video? Oh, I can't fit it. It's just not necessary. Who has a high resolution screen to watch it on? And now 4K video is cool. Drives me crazy. And this is some of the things that we'll be talking about when it comes to like fanboys and stuff, especially from some of the comments that we got. But ultimately, we can say kudos, Apple. I'm happy for iPhone users to finally have a feature that we've been playing with for a couple years now, and it'll be neat, and you guys are going to see it's cool. But that's also one of the bummers is that the base model iPhone, the one that's going to sell the most, is still starting at 16 gigabytes of storage, which means you probably only get about 12 to 14. I don't know how much space is actually taken up by iOS and the iOS apps. But it's definitely got to be better than what happens on a Samsung, because a 16 gigabyte Samsung phone would start you off at like 9 gigabytes of storage for the user. But even if it's just like 2. So after you do your formatting and after you convert from binary, or you convert to binary because your phone reads data in binary, then you're probably down to at most, 14 gigabytes of storage available to the user, maybe even as low as 12. And so once you start shooting UHD video and you start shooting, they'll take a picture and then shoot a little video snippet. They call that live photo. So when you touch the photo, it moves just like Harry Potter. Again, something that we've had for a while now on Windows phones. That's not a new feature, but again, happy to see iPhone users getting it, but also they're getting it at a time when 16 gigabytes of storage is going to get eaten up really quickly, and there's no way to add more storage. So it's almost a guarantee where if you care about features like your camera, you can't shop the entry-level iPhone. You really want to try and budget for the next tier up where you jump to 64 gigabytes of storage. That's That's my note for you Apple fans out there. It's just too lean now to have all of your apps, to have some music on your phone, to shoot video, to shoot photos, to actually use your device in the field. It's too much to manage. It's really not enough storage space. And then lastly, Apple TV. I actually am really excited to see Apple TV. Siri's going to be built in, so you can talk to your remote, and it's going to have really intelligent searching. So you can say like, hey, I want to watch a movie starring Patrick Swayze. And it's going to search all of the apps that you have on your Apple TV. It's not just going to be iTunes. So if there's a Patrick Swayze movie on Netflix, on Hulu, on HBO, it's going to search. Siri's going to search through all that stuff and then give you options on where you want to watch a Patrick Swayze movie. And it doesn't even have to be Patrick Swayze. It can be anything you want. So stuff like that, I think, is going to be really exciting. And then they're also going to be bringing more gaming to Apple TV. So it's funny, it's not exactly the same, but it's funny that Apple TV is going to be gaming in 1080p HD at 60 frames per second when game consoles like the Xbox and the PlayStation 4 still have difficulty gaming at 1080p 60 frames per second. So I know the games aren't as complex. They're not as big. They're not as in depth. It's mobile gaming. They're iPhone games. But that's still kind of weird that the tech on the Apple TV is moving us really closely to what we can accomplish on proper big game consoles that live under our TV. But I am really excited to see more living room competition, because I think how we outfit computers in our living room is going to be a really big deal moving forward for how we move services around. Chromecast started us off on a discussion of very easily being able to say like, hey, I want to watch a movie, and then bink, it's up on your TV. And so now with, Roku's and with Apple TVs and with Amazon Fire TVs and all these other services, the more competition we have, the better these products are going to get. So I'm always really stoked to see what's coming down the pipe for stuff like that. And then lastly, we've got the iPad Pro. And the iPad Pro is a 13 or 12.9 inch iPad, which is almost the resolution of two iPad Airs side by side. And it's just basically a really big iOS tablet. But it's obviously got Microsoft in its sights. They announced a new keyboard cover, which we're going to talk about that, and the Apple Pencil, which is an inductive stylus with a bunch of sensors built into it so that you can control things and do really fine point computing. And again, what's old is new again, the circle of tech. It's the circle of tech. As we go from something that was necessary back in Palm Pilot days, Apple made fun of it with the iPhone, and now we're back to using styli again. Is that the plural of stylus? Is the plural of stylus styli or styluses? I just recently discovered that the plural of octopus is not actually octopi. Who knew? Not me. So that was all the Apple news. And like I said, I'll have that link under the video so you can see I have a full hour-long video just talking about all the cool stuff that Apple did and Apple talked about. But we should probably talk about your replies to this. Starting off with the iPad Pro. This comes from the Michael RN. I don't know if the RN is Michael's last and middle name or if he's a registered nurse. Michael could be a registered nurse, and that could be really exciting for Michael to be in the trenches. Again, as we celebrate first responders and people who care for us in our society, maybe Michael is one of those people we should celebrate. But Michael writes, if you're smart and patient enough and do your research, you can find Surface Pro 3 bundles nowadays that have more value than just base iPad Pro. So the iPad Pro is a 32 gigabyte tablet that starts at $799. Does not include the keyboard. It does not include the stylus. So adding the stylus is another $100, and adding the keyboard is another $169. So to fully outfit an iOS tablet is going to be more expensive than fully outfitting a base model Surface Pro 3. In fact, a fully loaded 32 gigabyte iPad Pro is more expensive than a 128 gigabyte Core i5 Surface Pro 3. That's where Apple is positioning their products. And we can't even claim that the iPad Pro is going to be built nicer, because the iPad Pro is made out of aluminum, which is fine. That's a fine metal. But the Surface Pro 3 is made out of injection molded magnesium, which is a much more expensive and much more durable material to make something out of. So even the quality arguments fall by the wayside we normally would give to Apple, like, well, you can compare the MacBook to a Dell, and the MacBook's made out of plastic, and the Dell is made out of plastic, and the MacBook's made out of aluminum, so that's better. The Surface Pro 3 is even made out of a more expensive build material than the iPad Pro. And the Surface Pro 3 is going to be a full computer that can also do apps, as opposed to the iPad Pro, which is going to be an iPad. So it can only do apps. Now, we're going to get a bunch of really great productivity apps, but that's where we're sort of locked down. And what do we have? This is from Helder Sareva, who writes, oh, now a stylus. Once they said yick to stylus. Nah. I just like the way that he wrapped his comment with nah. There is a great video of Steve Jobs doing his announcement from 2007, talking about the iPhone. And at the time when the iPhone came out, a lot of smartphones required a stylus. You had a smaller screen and you had to touch these little keyboards with styluses. I have no idea. And so there's a great video of him talking about, we were thinking about using a stylus, but yuck. You can lose them, or you have to keep track of them, and they're terrible. So we're going to make our phone use the best pointing instrument that nature has ever created, your finger. Now we have Apple coming back and releasing the iPad Pro, where one of the major talking points is how you do productivity, how you might do graphics, how you might do engineering work. You need fine point touch computing. Your finger's too big. It's too clumsy. It's too dumb. You need a really cool stylus, and that stylus is going to cost you an extra $100. So first of all, thank you for the comments, Helder and Michael. This is where Apple runs into problems, because Apple likes to proclaim things. We've made a rule. Mini-sized tablets are terrible. Oh, wait, you want mini-sized tablets? Okay, well, we'll make the iPad mini. We have a rule. Ultrabooks are awful. Who would want a smaller form factor, underperforming laptop? Oh, wait, you do want portability, and you don't mind that it's a less powerful laptop. You just want it to be really, really small. Okay, well, we'll give you the MacBook Air. Who could ever want to use a larger screened phone? A 4-inch phone screen is perfect for your thumb. Oh, wait, you want phablets? Well, here's the iPhone Plus. And now we've got stylus. Styluses are terrible. They're old computing instruments unless you need them. And if you want them, now we've got the iPad Pro. Again, if Apple didn't make these proclamations, like they had the only rule, and this is the rule, and they made the rule, and this is the only way you could ever conceivably want to use technology products, we wouldn't give Apple this much crap. We wouldn't, because every single time the tech landscape changes, they have to break one of their rules. That's the way that like dogma works. It's like, this is an unquestioning, this is the way it needs to be until things change. And now we've got to scramble and come up with something. But, before in the past, we said that this thing was terrible, but now we're embracing it. If we just had sort of a more reasonable, like, this is the evolution of how our products work, or the evolution of how our services work, it wouldn't be that big a deal. But Apple keeps setting themselves up on this pedestal of, we've created the only way that you would ever want to use tech until you decide that you want to do something different. And then 3 years after those features have been released on other platforms, we're going to come back and give you something else. Which is one of the comments that we got from Inner Ear Thing. Inner Ear Thing writes some great comments. I always love reading the comments that he comes up. So Inner Ear Thing writes, anyone else find it also hilariously ironic that Microsoft invented the first tablet, then Apple made theirs years later and overtook Microsoft's tablet, and are now back to chasing Microsoft again with the iPad Pro. And so, yeah, it's pretty funny. And kind of coming back to that notion of Apple releasing things late, like a new technology is invented, and then it shows up in PCs or in Android phones. And then around 2 or 3 years later, then it starts showing up in iOS or Apple products. And this is so predictable now. Apple's not, they're not, we're not going to have conversations about innovative, because I think innovation can come in a variety of different form factors. The innovation of inventing a technology is one thing, and the innovation of making it consumer accessible is another type of innovation. And that's where Apple tends to make all of their marketing talk about the innovation of making new technologies easier for consumers to understand or to use. But when it comes to, how products are released, when new features are released, Apple is now so predictable about waiting and being crazy late to the market by around 3 years that we actually have an amazing web comment. So Joel Watson writes a web comic called Hijinks Ensue. And you can go to www.hijinksensu.com. You can check out his web comic. So when the Surface was first announced 3 years ago, it came with a keyboard cover. I'm going to go into screen share so you can read Joel's comic for those of you watching the YouTubes. For those of you on the audio stream, I'm just going to describe this comic. So the first panel is Steve Ballmer holding the new Surface, and everyone's calling it an iPad. Boo, your iPad sucks. And then in the second panel, Steve Ballmer is talking about how they built a keyboard into the case cover for their Surface. And then the third panel has a little caption at the top which says WWDC 2015, and it shows Tim Cook holding an iPad with a keyboard cover that has a keyboard built into it. So it's just kind of incredible that not only, because this comic was drawn in 2012. Joel Watson wrote this comic and inked this comic in 2012. 3 years ago, when the Surface was first released, he made this comic and called it, totally nailed it, because what did we see as one of the major accessories for the iPad Pro? A keyboard cover. A folding keyboard cover, a keyboard built into the flip cover for the iPad Pro. And this is just also hysterical because what Joel also called was the fact that everyone would call any tablet an iPad. So if you remember when the Surface Pro 2 was being handed out to NFL teams and they kept calling them Surface iPads or Microsoft iPads, or got my iPad and it's got Windows on it. That the iPad had become a word like Kleenex. So people wouldn't just say tablets, they would say iPads. And so it's just hysterical. This is how predictable Apple has become in being late to the party when it comes to introducing new technologies, where web comic artists are making fun of them years in advance, and then those things come true. And so the only thing Joel got wrong was that this wasn't announced at WWDC. It was announced during the September keynote. WWDC was back in June. But, being off by a couple months, not too shabby, because he got the year right, that it would take Apple 3 years after the introduction of the Surface to introduce their own keyboard flip cover for the iPad. Effing hysterical. Got another shout out. Go check out Hijinks Ensue. It's a great little comic. So we have a couple other comments on Apple stuff. And one of the things about the new iPhone coming out is it's going to have a pressure-sensitive screen. And I think this is actually really cool. I think this is an excellent adaptation because Apple won't give us additional hardware buttons. They're very anti-buttons. So your home button is kind of overworked. You can single tap it, you can double tap it, you can triple tap it. There's no back button, there's no menu button, there's no multitasking button. It's a lot of work for one button. We know that the home button can get kind of overworked on iPhones. It's a failure point for a lot of people as lint gets trapped under the home button. It can break pretty easily. So with Force Touch, you can press into the iPhone screen with a certain amount of force to get additional menu options or to multitask or to pop up preview messages. And I think that's actually a really cool adaptation. We know Apple's not going to give us extra buttons, so they've built into their screen tech the functionality that we would get from a back button or a menu button. So this comes from Techno Bambino. Actually, no. Let's do, this is from Ilpo Oksanen. Ilpo writes, with Force Touch, I feel that iOS loses a little bit of its intuitivity. I mean, I know how to use it, but I'm imagining my mom just picking up the phone. She would never find out about extra content being hidden behind a harder touch without me explaining it to her. And even then, if she has to remember light tap, medium tap, hard tap, there's going to be a problem. Of course, I can't know how intuitive different pressure levels for different stuff is going to be before I try it, but it doesn't sound promising to me. And so, Ilpo, I'm actually really glad that you phrased it this way, because I personally don't believe that anything is intuitive. I don't believe any technology or any design is intuitive. I don't believe you can make an intuitive piece of software. I believe that we only have varying degrees of familiarity. And so the more familiar you are with something, the easier it's going to be to use that thing. So there's very little more familiar to us on the iPhone, for example, than push on square open program. Like we've been using that since the early days of Xerox. You know, the first graphic user interfaces had square icon, touch it in some way, either through a mouse pointer or through a touch screen or a stylus, and then that thing opens. There's nothing intuitive about that. When the first graphic user interfaces came out, we had to teach people touch on square. Oh, it opened. That's crazy. We had to show them first. But then over successive generations of computer users, we've been just naturally teaching kids coming after us, touch on the square. Square opens things, you know, like that's familiar. And so I think it'll be very easy. I do think when people start picking up the iPhone, it's going to be very confusing at first. People aren't going to understand it because it's new. And iPhone users get really cranky about changing how their iPhones work. It's a very stable, very inert platform. It does not change very often. But I think this is going to be one of those positive benefits in bringing iPhone users into a more complete world of multitasking and interaction. And so whether or not we get it on Android right away, I don't think we will, because on Android, we have a variety of different tools and mechanisms for customizing, for multitasking, and for controlling how apps work, getting into menus, things like that. It's not as necessary. I think it would be cool. I think it would be fun. But on the iPhone, we're overworking how pretty and simple that interface is. You know, the iPhone started out as being a very narrow Palm Pilot style experience. So as they add more functionality, they really do need to incorporate more control over how you can use that product. And so that to me becomes a major benefit. Now, that your point being, you know, when you have to hand this to a mom or you have to hand this to your grandmother or grandparent, it's going to mean instruction because it's new. It's different. People aren't going to understand it. But I don't think this is going to be something that confuses people for very long. And I think it's designed in a way where the idea of medium press to pop up a preview and then harder press to open it is just going to be something that happens with muscle memory. And as evolved primates, we're pretty good with muscle memory stuff, you know, like these digits at the ends of our wonky arms do a pretty good job of remembering on their own how to control different interfaces and different pieces of hardware. So I'm actually fairly positive on 3D touch. That's what Apple's calling it, is 3D touch, but it's force touch. And it's basically a long and a different pressure sensitivity for how we interact with our gadgets. And then during my longer video, because of things like 3D touch and that we know companies like Qualcomm are working on technologies that will enable us to touch our screens for fingerprint. So like we have all this biometric stuff. And right now we have to build a fingerprint scanner into the home button or into the power button or on the back of the phone. There's like a divot where you're supposed to put your finger. Qualcomm is working on a technology where you can just touch your screen and it'll scan your fingerprint, like in science fiction movies, which hilariously up until now have been wrong. Like there's no way to just, oh, you know, I'll just pick up my phone and scan my thumbprint on the phone screen. You know, like NCIS does stuff like that all the time. Well, funnily enough, Qualcomm might actually make that a reality. So once we get 3D touch and fingerprint scanning capabilities built directly into our screens, I really feel that in the next year or two, we might start seeing the first concepts on an iPhone that has no home button. We won't need it. The hardware won't be necessary because the last major component of why we need a home button is the fingerprint, the biometric security. And we can find some other solution for getting you back home to your home screen. So we could have an iPhone that's just all screen. We could finally get rid of that wasted bezel space on the iPhone. Well, maybe not always, because you still need an earpiece, you still need a front-facing camera. We could radically improve the screen-to-body ratio on the iPhone by getting rid of the home button. So this comment, this is Techno Bambino's comment. He says, that future iPhone you mentioned with the full front display and no home button will be the first iPhone called the Apple phone, to coincide with the Apple Watch, Apple Music, and everything else. They will start again with the numbers too. That's what I predict. And I think that's brilliant. That comment blew my mind because we're getting away from iDevices. You know, we have the iPad, the iPhone, the iMac, but, you know, newer devices, we don't have any new iBooks. We got rid of those. The Apple Watch isn't called the iWatch, it's the Apple Watch. And so once we start shifting over and when we have that brand new product experience for the iPhone where we get rid of the home button to keep Apple's branding consistent, I think that's genius. And I really hope that comes with the next version, or we start hearing about stuff like that with the next version of iOS. Because there's something that Apple could do it would be kind of confusing the market and conflating the market. But, we have OS X for desktops and laptops. And then we have iOS. And this year we released iOS 9. So moving forward, what if we had iOS 10 was just iOS X? And then you would have, the iPad Pro uses OS X. It uses iOS X. And you're like, all of a sudden, consumers think that, the software on my iPad is the same as the software on my MacBook. It's totally the same thing now. We could start moving into iOS X on your Apple phone and then your Apple Watch and your Apple. Well, I guess you'd still have to call it an iPad. It wouldn't be the Apple Pad, but we could start rebranding all of their products to feel new and fresh and exciting again. And I think that's a territory Apple would be very successful in shifting all that stuff up. And so, like I said at the top of this video, you can't have an Apple announcement without sort of all the fanboys coming to the forefront. The anti-Apple fanboys, the Samsung and Microsoft fanboys with their pitchforks and their torches out, and then the Apple fanboys all talking about how it doesn't matter who did it first. It's that Apple did it now, so now it's good. The really crappy conversations that we get when all this stuff comes out. And it's always disappointing when the coverage starts really playing into confirmation bias. So I did one blog post on Apple's announcement because I thought that was appropriate. It's a really long blog post because you've got to talk about the 4 major products that were released. But this notion that an Apple press event means that I have to write 7 different blogs is just blog spam. And we saw way too much of that. Again, Apple is exciting to talk about, but it's not that exciting to talk about. And we have a lot of news that we need to cover in tech. And this is a big deal whenever Apple drops this many products, but it's irresponsible to just try and increase your click-throughs by dumping tons of tiny little mini articles on one press event. I think that's totally irresponsible. And at the same time, we also saw, the same sort of shenanigans from companies like The Verge. The Verge put out one of their graphs, one of their charts showing you the differences between the iPhone and the Galaxy and the Moto X. And of course, it's full of a bunch of speculative information because they put out their chart before Apple had even put out the tech specs page on the iPhone. So a lot of stuff was incomplete or wrong. So they couldn't even list battery capacity, which the battery capacity on the iPhone 6s is going to be smaller than the battery capacity on the iPhone 6. They couldn't tell you pricing because Apple hadn't officially announced pricing, but they had announced contract pricing. So The Verge lists the iPhone as being $200 and this Galaxy S6 as being $700. Well, yeah, because the iPhone is going to be $200 on contract, and the Galaxy S6 was like $600, $650 off contract. And The Verge loves doing crap like this, where it's like, it doesn't matter if it's accurate information. It doesn't matter if it's complete information. We're just going to put out something so that we can be first, and we'll get a bunch of page hits. So that was super frustrating. It's the thing that I always hate about covering Apple events is this frenzy where you've got to get content out, you've got to be first, and you've got to have all the right buzzwords and all the right keywords. And then you've also got to make sure that you've got flame bait so that you'll get the Android users to go and complain about your coverage. And then you get all this outrage traffic, and then you laugh all the way to the bank because you can show your blog sponsors and your advertisers that you get all these clicks on your site. And again, it's just further, anytime I see an outlet that writes like that, I ban them from my feed. I remove them from my RSS feeders. I refuse to link to any of their articles. I refuse to share any of their stuff. And for those of you who care about more nuanced discussion, I would hope that you would do likewise. When you see obvious flame bait or when you see obvious trolling like that, just cut them out. Just cut them out of your life. They're way more bothersome than they need to be. And that thrill you get from having an argument online is inconsequential because basically you're encouraging them to continue putting out crappy content like this, and they get to laugh all the way to the bank. So in the spirit of discussing technology with nuance, I have this week's call to action. Your CTA this week is I would like you to share in a comment below this video what your favorite announcement was from Apple. I know a majority of the people that follow my channel and follow my YouTube content and my blog are actually probably not Apple fans. But I think it's always a successful Apple keynote when they announce at least one thing that I would be excited to have on the products that I use. So if it's, a higher resolution display, or if it's an improved fingerprint scanner, or if it's the new features coming to the Apple TV, or the better biometric data that we can collect from the Apple Watch, I think Apple is successful when they make me want at least one of their features. So that's what I would like to hear from you folks out there. Is if you're an Apple fan, awesome. If you're not an Apple fan, awesome. But I want to hear from you. What was your favorite thing that Apple announced? What actually made you excited about more tech competition coming forward? Because if we don't have competitive companies, then our tech gets really boring really fast. If it's only Apple versus Samsung, that's terribly dull to talk about, because they're both racing to the middle of trying to satisfy all consumer demands. We need more companies in the space, but when we have the two biggest companies actually fighting for your money, actually fighting to create better products, that's when we get really cool stuff. Drop me a comment down below. I want to hear what your favorite announcement was from the Apple event. And just real quick, before we wrap up this video, I do have two other comments from other videos that are not Apple related. So I put out my Note 5 review a couple weeks ago, and that got a lot of traffic. And then also I did a series of comparisons, like the Note 5 versus the Note 4, Note 5 versus the LG G4. And so I had a couple comments that I wanted to talk about from those videos. And so the first comes from my Note 5 review from Dynamic Maxwell 120. And Dynamic Maxwell 120 is way cooler than Static Maxwell 120. Static Maxwell 120 never does anything. He's static. But Dynamic Maxwell, he's all over the place. He's doing stuff. He's a mover. He's a shaker. He's a cool dude. Sorry. Get some water. So Dynamic Maxwell writes, even if competitors make bigger or better phones, if they don't have as well an integration as the Note series does with the active digitizer and pen, I can't see myself giving up my Note. The palm rejection, tentative commands, pressure sensitivity, and multitasking is just too much to give up. This is what I think is really cool as we start talking about the diversity of the smartphone landscape. Right now, everyone's sort of making bigger screens to make bigger screens, but I still think Samsung has had the best reason for why our phones need two hands. So when you move to sort of a regular flagship sized phone, like a 4.8 to 5.1 inch screen, to a 5.7 or larger inch screen, Samsung has consistently had a reason why you would want to give up both hands. Because most flagship phones, you can use one-handed. They're a little bit easier to hold. They don't look ridiculous when you hold them up to the side of your face. There's a lifestyle, there's an ergonomic benefit to using a smaller flagship. So when you make the phone bigger and it requires both hands to really use the device, why do we want to make that jump? Sure, it's cool having the bigger screen, you're playing games, watching movies, but the actual day-to-day smartphone stuff doesn't seem to benefit very much, especially when you degrade the one-hand experience. And Maxwell's comment is a perfect example of giving us a reason why we step up to using both hands when we use the Note. And that's the S Pen. It's the one consistent through line that we've never been able to answer with the iPhone 6 Plus, with the Lumia 1520, which I think is an amazing mini tablet, but kind of a terrible phone. And then some of the other larger LG phones, like the original Flex or the LG G4, which is very close in screen size, but it's a little bit smaller. So that's one of the things that I love talking about tech is, that was a very nuanced example of something that I think is a perfect thing to talk about when we're looking at the lifestyle experience of incorporating more technology into our daily lives. And that's also why I think moving forward, we need to start addressing how our hands and eyes and ears interact with data, because it can't just be continuing to use glowing rectangles. We need to start diversifying that experience. And then I got a comment from Joseph Gisaldi. And this is on my Note 5 versus G4 comparison. And Joseph disagrees with me. And again, this is one of those things I'd love to get other people's thoughts on the issue. But again, I want to celebrate this comment because it's talking specifically about his usage. And so one of the points on the G4 is the G4, you can remove the battery. On the Note 5, the battery is built in. And Joseph writes, if you honestly carry around extra batteries in your pocket, that means you use your phone way too much. Only exception is if you use it a lot for work. Well, that's a pretty major exception, Joseph. As for micro SD, I think it's not a deal breaker. I have the 64 gigabyte Note 5 with 500 songs and over 600 pics and vids, and I still have 40 gigabytes left. Not to mention, I also have Age of Ultron and Jurassic World on the phone, which I don't know that Age of Ultron has been released yet. Has it? It's still summer. I don't know. Anyway, the G4's UI is horrendous. Software isn't great. Note 5 is the better phone, period. Yes, it's more expensive, but it's worth it, especially when feel in hand. G4 feels like a play school phone, and the Note 5 feels like you're holding an expensive piece of hardware. So this is where we maybe confuse comparison with just subjectivity. But I appreciate Joseph's point, because what he's talking about are specific to him. He doesn't use his phone enough to warrant having an extra battery, which is fine. Or he maybe is really good about always plugging his phone in whenever he just needs to top it off. And then also, I don't know, I would maybe question how much storage he's actually used on the phone, because the 64 gigabyte Note 5 doesn't give you 64 gigabytes of storage. It's probably going to cut that down into the 50s. And with 500 songs, a ton of pics and videos, and 2 feature films, that's still probably more than 10 gigabytes, but still, we're talking about the life of a product over years of use, and how much you really want to manage storage on that device. So 64 is actually quite a bit of storage to have built into your phone, but with the G4, you can always pop in more storage whenever you want. And so that's what I think is exciting about the difference between a phone that only has built-in storage and a phone that has the ability to upgrade the storage. So over a year, at some point, you're going to have to manage the files on the phone with built-in storage, even with 64 gigabytes of data. You know, I like to have tons of music on my phones, just because there are sometimes I don't want to stream, or if I'm out on a hike up in the hills, I don't get great data. So I want to have music on the device. And then I shoot tons of photos in RAW and UHD video, not just HD video, but UHD video. And so on my Galaxy S6, which only has 32 GBs, I've had to pull stuff off of that phone on a near weekly basis. I have to actively manage the storage on that phone. I would have to manage it way less with 64 gigabytes of storage, but I would still need to manage it fairly regularly. On the G4, I have a 128 gigabyte card in addition to the 32 gigabytes of built-in storage. And since I've owned that phone, I'm now 3/4 of the way full with that card, but I've never had to manage the storage on that phone. I still, even from the original camera test that I did on the G4, all of those files are still on the memory card. And when I do need to manage it, I'll be able to do a bulk rate, delete anything that I don't need, but I'll maybe need to do that once every couple of months, or once, I would say maybe once every 6 months. Whereas that's something that I need to do on every couple of days on a Galaxy S6. So that's the difference. It's really, Joseph's absolutely right. It does come down to how you use your device. But when we're talking about power user grade, smartphone computing, mobile photography, high-end luxury premium devices, how much time and effort do you really want to spend in managing this stuff versus, like, oh, well, it's built nicer and it looks prettier, so I like it better. And those are going to be really big debates. I feel the consumer revolution in smartphone computing has really put pressure on manufacturers to release pretty, and sometimes to release pretty at the expense of functionality, form over function. And for geeks and nerds like me who grew up, with DOS under my fingertips, that makes me a little cranky. It really does. So, Joseph, thank you so much for the comment. And folks, we're coming up on the hour, so I think we should probably wrap this puppy up. Again, I really want to hear your thoughts on things like Apple. On the stuff, what is the Apple? That was the most awkward way I think I could have announced that sentence. Because these are, I think, very important conversations for where we go moving into the future. And I worry. So I used to be an Apple product specialist for a contractor that did work with the Department of Energy. And this was back in the day when Apple had just put out the very first dual core, dual socket G5. And this thing was a monster. It was one of the first sort of consumer built machines, mass produced machines, where they had liquid cooling built in. It was the 2.7 gigahertz dual core, dual socket G5. Just an absolute monster of a workstation. This thing was a beast. And Department of Energy was using scores of them as like server racks. because you could just, you could like multi-compute them all together, just patch them all together. It was amazing technology at the time. And to watch them step away from that type of professional, high grade, corporate, and engineering style use and really start trying to push people from OS 10 to iOS for productivity makes me a little nervous. It really does, what the future of our computing landscape is going to look like. And I think we have very serious issues that we need to address in terms of ergonomics and how we diversify the data experience, how we move apps and services closer to our natural senses without blocking our natural senses. And I need a company like Apple, who is very good at lifestyle and design and streamlining new technology to make them more consumer accessible, to be at the forefront of that discussion. I don't like it when a company like Apple is 3 or 4 years behind new technology because it's better to make money off of new technologies that way. I really want them to be at the forefront. I really want them to be driving the industry, not responding to the industry. And so that makes me nervous. It means to me that it's going to take even longer for some of these new technologies like augmented reality to make it into consumers' hands, because we'll all wait for Apple to put their polish on it, as opposed to Apple being at the beginning of this conversation and driving the market and driving the industry. Instead, they'll make more money if they just wait and they just hold off and they just deny consumers access to these types of tools. As we still have problems with things like distracted driving, as we still have problems with user interfaces for people with disabilities, as we still have a lot of things that we need to address in the tech world. And Apple isn't helping us address them. Apple is instead pumping the brakes and slowing us down. Well, that's just my feeling on it, and I want to hear from you. So drop me some comments down below this video so that we can chat about how we think the future of technology should work. As always, folks, thanks so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe for more rambling podcasts like these. And I would not be able to continue producing on this channel if you all weren't out there supporting it by leaving me comments, because that's where I pull material from so that I can produce this weekly podcast. Hitting the fan funding links on my YouTube videos. That helps keep the lights on here at Some Gadget Guy. Or if you're not into direct fan funding contributions, if you hit my Amazon affiliate links before you go shopping on Amazon, I definitely appreciate it, because it takes that little bit of extra effort to remember. I'm going to go to Some Gadget Guy's channel or Some Gadget Guy's blog. I'm going to click on one of those links, and then I'm going to do my Amazon shopping. That kicks me back some advertising revenue. It's no additional cost to you, and it's greatly appreciated because, again, helps keep the lights on here at Some Gadget Guy. And then, of course, sharing my videos on your favorite social services like Twitter and Reddit and Facebook and the Googles Plus. Just bringing all kinds of new people to the conversation. That's really exciting because I think I've got one of the best fan bases for having grown up and nuanced discussion about technology, not just fanboys that tell everybody to die because they hate what you like and you're wrong. We have great conversations down in the comments of my videos, and that's definitely something that I want to continue with moving into the future. So hit that thumbs up button, and I will catch you all on the next podcast.